What's going on, everybody? Well, in celebration of Infinity War finally being released, I'm doing a few Marvel Cinematic Universe rankings. I've already dropped my ranking of all 19 MCU films, so check that out, guys. Right after you check out this video, which is going to be my ranking of all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe villains, or at least the ones that I can remember. Hopefully I didn't leave any off. I'm sure you guys let me know in the comments if I did. And also keep an eye out because I'm also going to be ranking all of the heroes of the MCU. It's going to be coming out after this video, so check that out. Unless you're watching this days in the future, then it's already here. So once you get done with this one, click over and check that one out too. So starting off, guys, at the bottom of the barrel, the bottom of the list, what the hell is it? I forgot. Number 25. Damn, we got a lot of villains. The Sovereign. The Sovereign, the gold people from Guardians of the Galaxy 2. What the hell was that? That's just a terrible villain. Okay, I mean, there's going to be a lot of terrible villains on this list because as much as the MCU is awesome, their villains are not so great, at least most of them. The Sovereign is just such a boring villain. Gold people that have these batteries that they only really establish that storyline so that Rocket Raccoon can steal one and incite this little incident that puts them on the run. That's the only reason these characters exist. They stay throughout the movie. They have these little 80s video game arcade cliche thing going on that's actually one of those 80s cliches that I don't like. You know, sometimes the whole 80s thing is cool nowadays. Sometimes it feels weird. This feels weird. The Sovereigns suck. Don't like this villain at all. That's why it's at the bottom. Number 25, the Sovereign. Number 24 for me is going to be the Shocker, or the Shockers, whatever you want to call them. We had two of them. Didn't really get to know either one of them. You even got Bokeem Woodbine, a very good actor playing it, and they don't use him at all. You know, this is definitely a villain that they throw in just to kind of cycle through some of these MCU Spider-Man villains that they know people want to see, and so they can say, oh, hey, see, we've got the Shocker in there. We're checking off the list. The Shocker's not a very interesting villain. They didn't even give him the full suit. There's actually set photos where he was wearing the full mask and everything of the Shocker, and they didn't use it in the movie. So really the only thing that he has is this little pulse, little hand shit, and it's not interesting. It's not an intimidating villain, especially stacked up next to Michael Keaton's The Vulture, which you will see much higher on this list. It's forgettable. So I'm not a fan of the Shocker. That's number 24. Number 23 is going to be the Dark Elf leader, Malekith. And I have almost nothing to say about this guy because I remember almost nothing about this guy. He's one of the most unmemorable and most least interesting characters in the entire MCU. I don't even know what the hell his motivation was. I remember something about some red ether, and I remember he's an elf. That's about it. So nothing else to say about Malekith. Don't remember shit about him because he's not a very good villain. Number 23 is Malekith. Number 22 for me is going to be Silius. I believe that's how you say it. That's the villain from Doctor Strange, played by Mads Mikkelsen. A very stock, boring villain that's just evil for the sake of being evil. You don't even really get into his motivations too much aside from him wanting power. He gets wiped out eventually, and there's this bigger, badder villain behind him that was doing the strings the entire time, so he's not even really the one leading the show. It was one of the biggest flaws of Doctor Strange whenever I saw it, amongst a lot of other flaws, because that one's on the bottom rung of my MCU films, which you would know if you checked out my ranking, which you should do after this if you haven't. But Silius, not that interesting of a villain, so that's why he's where he's at. Number 21 is going to be Justin Hammer, one of two villains in Iron Man 2 that is completely wasted. You've got the great Sam Rockwell, and you completely waste him. This is a guy that could be the Lex Luthor of the MCU. He's just a guy who is so jealous and so envious of Tony Stark's intellect, his success, his notoriety, that he just does a bunch of stupid shit out of all that envy and that greed, wanting to be like Tony Stark. And that's all we get from him. He's the guy who kind of gets manipulated by Whiplash, and that's all we get of him. We're never probably going to see him again in the MCU. And really the biggest crime, like I said, is that they wasted Sam Rockwell. Sam Rockwell is one of the greatest actors of all time, and you wasted him. Shame on you. Number 20 is going to be Ego the Living Planet. Now, I was so excited about seeing Kurt Russell end of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Didn't even realize he was going to be a villain. All I saw was Kurt Russell and Star-Lord having some back and forth. I think Chris Pratt and him could have worked really well off each other. Marvel had other plans. My vision for what Ego was not their vision. Ego is this kind of, you know, somewhat of an interesting character throughout the movie, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, he's the main villain. He's so fucking evil. All of his motivations get brought out, and it's some of the darkest, most evil, volatile shit that you're ever going to see in the MCU, which is one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of Guardians 2, and that's all James Gunn's writing. He's known for that mean-spirited type of stuff. Ego is just not that great of a villain because he's suddenly a villain and then the movie's over. You don't really get to marinate with him being a villain. You don't even know he's a villain until all of a sudden, and instead of it being this huge, oh my god, Darth Vader's my father moment, it just feels like this weird turn out of nowhere and then the movie's suddenly over. So I'm not a fan of the Ego. I love you, Kurt Russell, but not a fan of Ego. Number 19 is the other villain in Iron Man 2 that got wasted, and that's Whiplash, played by the great Mickey Rourke, another actor that you completely waste, although he does get some action scenes at least. The first third of this movie, he's a really interesting villain. Then he kind of goes to the back front for a little while. You don't really see much of him, and then he becomes a repeat of Obadiah Stane and the Ironmonger in the climax of this movie. You know, it's very well documented that Jon Favreau was rushed into production to do this movie. He only had a year to make it. He wanted 2 or 3 years, and they didn't give it to him, and it shows, and that's why Iron Man 2 is at the bottom of my MCU ranking. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen my ranking, but it is. And Whiplash, you know, there's a lot of documentation too about how Mickey Rourke was kind of lied to about what his role was going to be, and he got kind of minusculed down to what it was in the final product. So Whiplash, cool looking villain, not a very cool executed villain. Number 18 is going to be the Chitauri from the Avengers. Now, these villains are not very interesting because they're literally cannon fodder. They don't even really speak. It's just a bunch of monsters, but they look badass and they are utilized well. Even though they're cannon fodder, they are utilized well as cannon fodder. They're interesting. You're curious on where they came from. They're bigger in numbers than they are in personality. I like the way that they look. They create a very cool third act in the Avengers. They're memorable for that alone, and they look pretty badass. So the Chitauri, there you go, number 18. Number 17 is going to be Aldrich Killian, played by Guy Pearce. Now, I'm a big fan of Iron Man 3. I know it's not a popular opinion. Don't really give a fuck. Aldrich Killian, I think that the whole thing with the Extremis is interesting, but he is a bit of a ripoff of the Riddler, and even to a degree, the Electro, if you can call that Electro, that we got in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where he's just this nerdy guy that kind of feels shorted by the main character of Tony Stark, and so he has revenge on him because he didn't want to be best friends with him, I guess. Now, I found out that, you know, as many times as I've rewatched Iron Man 3, I thought that I liked Aldrich Killian a lot more than I actually ended up whenever I did this ranking, and it's because I like Guy Pearce. And I realized that anything I liked about Aldrich Killian is just because I like Guy Pearce. So it's not really the villain or the character of Aldrich, it's just the actor behind it that I like. So Aldrich Killian, kind of a weak villain. I think that they utilize him somewhat well, but stacked up next to the Mandarin as that little switcheroo that they did, definitely not a fair trade in what the Mandarin was promised to be, and then you end up with the main villain being Aldrich Killian, so that's why he's where he's at. Number 16 is going to be Red Skull. Now, I think Red Skull looks cool. I think that Hugo Weaving did well in the role. I just don't think that the villain is really that interesting the way that it's executed. He seems like kind of a stock Nazi character. We've seen those dime a dozen. I was hoping that we were going to see a lot more of this character later on in the Captain America trilogy. Maybe we will see more of this character. Maybe not. We will see. But what we got in the Captain America First Avenger, interesting enough to get him where he's at, but he's still not really the most well-executed villain or the most interesting in the MCU. Number 15 is going to be Ultron from Age of Ultron. Now, the trailer Ultron would be much higher in this list. The actual movie Ultron is where it's at because I was expecting this dark, sinister villain, and that's what the trailers promised us with the, you know, there's no strings on me whole thing. And then you get it, and it's basically a robot version of Tony Stark. It's a lot of quips, a lot of jokes, and I think that the MCU really shoots himself in the foot with their forced humor sometimes. This is one of those moments. That's why Ultron is so low. Still an entertaining villain. Could have been a lot better. Number 14 is going to be Yellow Jacket from Ant-Man. Yes, this is kind of another stock villain, but I think that the look is badass. I think Corey Stoll's a very good actor, and he does very well in the role. And that whole third act fight between Ant-Man and Yellow Jacket brings him up. I think that he is interesting and utilized well enough in the movie to kind of go through all that mediocrity and say that that is a memorable villain because of the way that they utilized him. Number 13 is going to be the Mandarin. You know, you got Ben Kingsley playing the Mandarin, but he's also playing whatever the hell his name was, I completely forget. But basically, it's a switcheroo. You got the Mandarin who's playing all these terrorist tapes, and it's all a ruse. Ends up being just this really cowardly actor with a strange accent and a little goofy, aloof personality. And a lot of people hate it. A lot of people would put him so far down on this list that he'd probably be below 25, but I enjoy it. You know, I know it's sacrilegious for comic book fans to say that you enjoy this version of the Mandarin, but I enjoy the way that they utilized him within this Shane Black movie. So he's memorable to me for that reason alone. I think Ben Kingsley did great on both aspects of the character. Maybe they should never have done that. They probably shouldn't have done that, actually, because it pissed off everybody who's an Iron Man fan. But for me, myself, I think it was entertaining. That's why the Mandarin is at the spot that he is. Number 12 is going to be Ulysses Klaw. You got a little bit of him in Ultron, you got a little bit more of him in Black Panther, and in some ways I think he overshadows Killmonger, especially in the first half of the movie. I think Andy Serkis is really charismatic. I think that the whole thing with his hand being a gun and some other shit is really cool. He's utilized really well within the movie of Black Panther. I wish we could have got to see more of him. Ulysses Klaw, he was memorable to me. He was cool. Love Andy Serkis. There you go. Number 11 is going to be the Abomination. Now, the Abomination is a villain that I actually hope we get to see later on in this universe at some point, because the ultimate confrontation between him and the Hulk is one of the greatest moments of the MCU so far to me. That whole ending fight of Monster versus Hulk is badass. I think that the whole thing that Tim Roth brings throughout the movie leading up to his transformation is really good as an antagonist. I like the Abomination quite a bit, especially enough that I really hope we get to see this guy again. Make it happen, Marvel. Number 10 is going to be Hela, played by Cate Blanchett in Thor Ragnarok. Very intimidating villain, very well acted. I like her look, both in kind of the gothic chick that just got out of a rainstorm look and the whole thing with the Maleficent headdo kind of thing. I think that she looks cool. I think Cate Blanchett plays her very well. Obviously, she does a lot of damage to Asgard and to Thor. So she's a very effective villain. She's utilized well within the movie. She's acted well. What more can you ask for? Number 9 is going to be the villain that started it all, Obadiah Stane. Now, this is a villain that has kind of become unmemorable because he's very kind of bland in comparison to a lot of these larger-than-life villains. But if you go back and watch that original Iron Man, he's a very effective villain. He's a very effective character, almost to the point where he should have probably stayed in the Iron Man franchise a little bit longer. And you would have gotten a lot more from him. You would have gotten a lot more gravity between the relationship between Tony and him, and Tony and his father, and Obadiah and the father, and how this whole family thing turns into him just wanting to take over the company and wipe out Tony Stark so he can keep it all for himself. The Ironmonger thing is pretty cool. I think it makes for a good third act. It definitely was cool before it was repeated in Iron Man 2, and then all of a sudden Iron Man fighting a bigger Iron Man became very tired, but Obadiah Stane started it all. I like him. That's where he's at. Number 8 for me is going to be Ronan the Accuser. Big fan of Guardians of the Galaxy. I think that this villain looks cool. I think that he's utilized well. I think that his motivations are there. I think that he is a really good foil for the Guardians of the Galaxy and their motivations. He's a really entertaining villain for this type of movie. I really think that he is underrated as far as villains, because a lot of people say that he's not very, memorable. He's very stock and he's very bland. I disagree. I think he was cool. Number 7, this might surprise some people, Zemo from Civil War. Yes, Zemo has no reason to be in the movie. The movie could be exactly the same if you took Zemo out of it. But if you leave him in, he's one of the more interesting villains in the MCU to me, because he's not this guy trying for ultimate evil, ultimate power. He's not trying to build a suit. He's not trying to have superpowers. He honestly has a very human reason to be pissed off at the Avengers. He's toying with them behind the scenes. He's very manipulative, and he's doing all these things without being evil and murdering a bunch of people. He's just getting them to kind of wipe themselves out. And even though they take it just a step too far with him knowing somehow that Iron Man and Captain America and Bucky Barnes were all going to meet in that little hangar in the third act, that was a little bit silly, but the way they utilize Zemo, to me, he's one of the more interesting, emotional, and human villains in the MCU, and that's why he is so high for me. Number 6 is going to be Eric Killmonger from Black Panther. Now, Michael B. Jordan did a damn good job with this villain. He's one of the better executed villains in comic book history, really. I mean, a lot of people put this guy up there next to Heath Ledger's Joker. I think you're nuts if you say that, but anyway, that's what effective a villain, how much of an effective villain that he is, that he's had that much of an impact on some people that have seen this movie, even if they're overblowing it quite a bit. But I think Michael B. Jordan does great. I think the look of Killmonger is awesome. I think his motivations are great for the movie. Great foil for Black Panther. He's utilized well to propel the story forward for Black Panther. The only flaw with him and why he's not in my top 3, like pretty much every other list that I've seen, is that I don't get enough of him in Black Panther. I want to see what makes him go from this innocent kid to Killmonger. I don't want to be just told in some exposition. So there was some room in this movie to show us more of Killmonger. They chose not to. That brought it down a little bit for me, but great villain. Number 5 is what my buddy Sean Chandler always refers to as the Walter White of the MCU, Vulture, played by the great Michael Keaton. Vulture was a big surprise for me. Was not expecting Vulture to be that awesome. I've never been a fan of the comic book version of Vulture, an old man in a bird suit. You get this new incarnation of Vulture played by Michael Keaton, and he's basically the Walter White of the MCU. He's a family man trying to make it on his own, Tony Stark and the world and fate says, fuck you, you're just gonna go in the gutter because whatever, we're more important than you. And he says, nope, screw that, I'm just gonna become a villain and make money my own way so I can take care of my family. Very understandable motivations, very intimidating, especially the scene whenever, right before the little homecoming dance, when he pulls the gun out and he's talking to Peter Parker and basically letting him know that he knows who he is. One of the best scenes in that entire movie. Michael Keaton's awesome, Vulture's awesome, that's where he's at. Number 5. Number 4 for me is going to be the Winter Soldier. And one of the reasons why he's one of the most interesting villains and up so high is because he's a character who's also going to be on my heroes list. He's an anti-hero. He's a villain sometimes, he's a good guy sometimes. Now, obviously, with Winter Soldier being one of my favorite movies of all time, and my favorite comic movie of all time, and my favorite MCU movie of all time, the titular character of Winter Soldier, the main villain, he's gonna be pretty fucking high for me. I think that he's really utilized well. The way that they bring back Bucky and they tie that storyline from him dying suddenly in Captain America: The First Avenger, you get to have this really emotional kind of play out between Captain America and Winter Soldier. You're trying to bring him back to the good, get him to see the light, get all the brainwashing shit off of him. Physically, he's one of the most intimidating and scary looking villains in the MCU. He basically kicks the shit out of every single person he comes into contact with. I love the whole 70s spy espionage version of his character. And even whenever he's still kind of a villain in Civil War, when he's on the run as this fugitive and kind of is the catalyst that starts this whole war, love the way they utilize the character. One of my favorite characters in the MCU, one of my favorite villains. Number 4, the Winter Soldier. Number 3 is going to be Alexander Pierce, the other villain from Captain America: The Winter Soldier. The most underrated villain in the entire MCU because nobody ever talks about him. I don't know if it's because he's not a supervillain, he's not a monster, he's not this person with superpowers or a person in a robot suit. He's just a regular dude in a suit. Maybe that's why people don't remember him. I remember him because Robert Redford is great in the role and they utilize him well. This dude created this entire interworking web of Hydra agents within S.H.I.E.L.D., within the White House, within the CIA, within every single little government agency in the world. He did all of that. I mean, that's badass. I think the way that he kind of manipulates everything with the events of Winter Soldier, just a dude in a suit does all of that, that's a bad motherfucker. That's why he's my number 3. Top 2, is it going to be the God of Mischief or is it going to be that big purple bastard with the golden glove? Number 2 is going to be Loki. Loki is the villain that we have had the most time with. We've seen the most of him. He's been the villain in 4, well, is he really the villain in Thor Ragnarok? I don't know. He's the villain, main villain in 2 movies. He's a side villain in 2 movies. We'll just say that. But he is a villain in 4 MCU movies. And we've seen him constantly have this struggle and these different relationships between Thor, Odin, his mother, the whole, world of Asgard. All of the things about Loki that make him great is that he's entertaining to watch, he's very intimidating, he's very powerful without needing this huge brawn, without needing all these superpowers, just being this little mischievous bastard, and he's just one of the most fun villains to watch. So Loki is most people's number 1, but somebody just dethroned his ass on this last movie that I saw this past weekend called Infinity War, and that is my number 1 villain, Thanos. Thanos delivered everything that the MCU promised us that this villain was going to be. This dude is insanely intimidating. He's powerful as fuck. His motivations are so understandable, even though they're so evil and dark and sinister. He makes such a compelling argument for why it's all necessary that you're kind of half reasoned to where you're like, yeah, he's got a good fucking point. And just the whole thing that they do with Infinity War basically being Thanos' story was brilliant. The way that he's such an emotional and deep and rich character for being his first mainstay in the MCU. We've been, shown pieces of him. He's had cameos. We've heard stories of him for like the past maybe 5 or 6 years since the Avengers. And then you get to finally see him, and the dude is everything that was promised and more. So Thanos, not only the best villain in the MCU, he's got to be in the conversations for best comic book movie villains of all time. Thanos, you are awesome. Well, that's my ranking of the MCU villains, guys. All 25. Hopefully I didn't leave any out. Like I said, you're probably gonna let me know down below if I forgot one. Hopefully it was nobody major. Let me know down in the comment section below, what is your guys' ranking, or maybe even just your top 5 MCU villains, or your bottom 5. Keep it interesting. Well, let's do both. Put all your thoughts down in the comment section below, guys, and we will talk about them. Please like, share this video, hit that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. Be sure to check out my MCU ranking, my Infinity War spoiler-free review, and my soon-to-come-out MCU Heroes ranking. check all that out, guys. If you want to check out some of my social media links, check the video description below. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Spreadshirt, and my Patreon page. And if you want to check out some more of my videos, including all those ranking videos I just told you about, check that out by clicking right over here.